Okay, I'm going to give you some notes on batteries. So you've probably seen batteries and used batteries. You might not have looked really closely at them to see what voltage they are, but we'll do that and I'll show you a couple batteries. Okay, here's a D-cell battery, and if I look closely at this, it says 1.5 volts. You can't see those words, but if I can use this multimeter set on voltage, and I can measure the voltage here, and that says 1.37. Huh, that's not exactly 1.5. That's a little bit less. This battery's what you call a little bit dead. This one is 1.52, so that's a really good battery right now. That's got plenty of voltage and current. And this more dead battery still has lots of voltage. 1.37 is not that low, but actually if you hook it up to a circuit, it's probably going to drop even more because it's going to have a higher internal resistance. We'll talk about resistance later. This is also, so I said this is 1.5 volts, the D cell. This double A is also 1.5 volts. You can see it on, if you read the side, it says AA 1.5 volts. You can measure it with a voltmeter, and it's 1.4. So, I mean, none of them are exactly 1.5 because they're close enough. This one here is this rectangular battery is a 9-volt battery. Actually says 9 volts there. And this is equivalent to, let's see, how many of these would have to be fit into this package to make 9 volts. You could probably figure that out. If this is 1.5 and this is 9, you got a whole bunch of these inside there. This is also, this little AAA is also 1.5 volts, so you could fit those in instead maybe. So the size of the battery does not tell you the voltage. A lot of these are the same voltage, but different size batteries. So the purpose of a battery is to make a potential difference or a voltage. You know what potential difference is. But we talked about potential energy, and then we talked about electrical potential energy, and then we talked about potential, and that's voltage. And it makes a voltage between these two terminals. So that's a potential difference. Kind of like a gravitational potential difference where you have if you have a little hill, the top of the hill is going to have a higher gravitational potential than the bottom of the hill. Things are going to want to roll down the hill. Same thing here. The charge is going to want to flow from the high voltage to the low voltage if you connect it with a wire. Batteries are designed to make a constant voltage. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good. And it's not a constant current. The current really depends on the load or whatever you connect to the battery. The voltage causes an electric field, and the electric field causes charge to flow if there's a connection, and that's called current. Current is charge flowing. Some analogies for this. It's good to have analogies since you can't see the charge flowing, but you could think about a water pump that pumps water to the top of the hill and then the water flows down. The battery is like a pump, or an air pump that creates a pressure difference, and then air would want to flow from high pressure to low pressure. Okay, here's the circuit symbol for a battery. The high voltage is the longer line and the low voltage is the shorter line. So the idea for the battery came originally from a scientist named Luigi Galvani in the late 1700s, early 1800s. He was experimenting with frogs' legs, and he happened to notice that when he had two different metals touching the frog's leg at the same time, the frog's leg would twitch, and this is a dead frog. And so he came up with a theory of something happening within the leg that caused the leg to become, in a way, living and kind of an animal electricity or something like that. And he published a paper, and this idea of making the dead living was clearly something that people started to worry about, and that's where you had ideas that got into popular culture and created things like Frankenstein book. I'll show you a little clip from that movie. Actually, let's watch that now.
Dr. Bauman, I learned a great deal from you at the university. about the violet ray, the ultraviolet ray, which you said was the highest color in the spectrum. You were wrong. Here in this machinery, I have gone beyond that. I have discovered the great ray that first brought life into the world. Oh, and your proof? Tonight you shall have your proof. At first I experimented only with dead animals, and then a human heart, which I kept beating for 3 weeks. But now I am going to turn that ray on that body and endow it with life. And you really believe that you can bring life to the dead? That body is not dead. It has never lived. I created it. I made it with my own hands from the bodies I took from graves, from the gallows, anywhere. Go and see for yourself. You too. Yes? Eh? Quite a good scene, isn't it? One man crazy, 3 very sane spectators. It's moving. It's alive. It's moving. It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. Oh, in the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be God. Oh.
Now I know what it's like to be God. So that idea, of course, there's always been concern about science throughout history because, and with good reason, right? There are things that science has discovered or created that can and have caused problems for people. You can probably think of several of them right now. So this was definitely a concern for people, and are they really creating life? But another scientist, Mr. Volta, said, I don't think it's a life force. I don't think it's animal electricity. I think it just has to do with those 2 different metals you have, and any kind of a salty solution, such as the fluid that this frog's leg has in it. And Volta made some layered metals with paper. I'll show you how to do that later. And he started demonstrating his It was called a voltaic pile. And he started demonstrating this all around Europe in big theaters. And you might wonder, what could you, in those days, if you made a voltaic pile, which was basically a primitive battery, and you have a voltage, what in the world could you demonstrate with it? Because there were no bulbs, there were no motors, right? There's nothing to run on it. Well, it turns out he used it to show people what a great shock you could get from it. So this is a little quote about the apparatus. He described how to make it. 2 kinds of metal and some kind of pasteboard or skin soaked in salt water. And then he described the great shocks that people could get when they went to his performances. You could experience a blow and a prick. You could get a sensation of light in the eyes, a convulsion in the lips. Sounds really lovely. You could start to hear a sound and feel like there's kind of a crackling and shock. So he'd get some pretty serious shocks in his demonstrations, and this brought the idea of voltaic piles into popular imagination, and a lot of people started experimenting with them. Okay, how does a battery work? I've got some notes here, and you'll see a handout on the assignment sheet where you can write these notes, or you could just write them in your notebook. There's this idea in chemistry called electronegativity, which is the tendency to attract electrons. And the periodic table tends to be less electronegative on the left and more electronegative on the right. However, there's some exceptions. For example, copper and zinc. It turns out copper is actually more electronegative than zinc. And these are their electronegativities. So they're slightly different. And because of that, if you put copper and zinc next to each other, zinc will tend to donate electrons to the copper if you connect them here. The problem is if you do that, then copper will become negatively charged and it won't accept electrons anymore. It will repel them, right? So what the electrolyte does, which is this salty material in between, allows electrons to flow back to the zinc so that it can continue to donate them. The electrons are flowing toward the zinc and the positive charges are flowing the other way, right? Positive charges don't really flow, but we talk about that all the time. Okay, so let me show you, well, here's how to make one. Take something copper, an electrolyte, then zinc, then copper, electrolyte, zinc, stack it on top of something metal, and then there's your battery. That's a battery right there, and that's how it's made. You just make several layers of these voltaic cells, they're called, and that makes a voltaic pile. And so let me just make one and I'll show it to you. Okay, I've got some water. I'm going to put some salt in it and a little bit of vinegar, which helps there. And then I'm going to cut up a bunch of little pieces of paper that I'll be dipping in the water which will be for the electrolytes. And I'm going to put all the paper in the water to get it wet, and I'm going to start stacking on this tinfoil right here. I've got pennies, which is copper. I've got washers, which are zinc. And I've got these wet pieces of paper, salty wet pieces of paper. So I'm going to do the pattern, which is copper, paper, zinc, and just repeat it. Copper, paper. Oh, that paper is too big. I'll cut it down. Got about 3 layers now of copper, paper, zinc, copper, paper, zinc, copper, paper, zinc. And now I'm going to check the voltage that I've got on this battery. Oh, that's already 1.0 volts. So if I could get up to 2 volts, I could light a red LED. I'm going to try that. Okay, one more layer, copper, paper, zinc. I skipped ahead a little bit so you didn't have to watch me do all that. And this is, 3.5 volts. That will definitely light a red LED. Okay, here I've clipped this alligator clip onto the bottom, which is the tinfoil, and I'm going to touch the red LED to the top, and you can see it lights. Can you see that? Maybe. I hope you can see that the LED lights. Okay, so what's the difference between a battery and a capacitor? Answer that question in your notes.